Welcome everyone to the Minnesota Twins franchise on MLB The Show 17. Today's episode is a very big one. We are going through the MLB Draft and assembling our first draft class of the series. The MLB Draft happens during the season, here in the month of June. We already knew we'd have the number 1 overall selection after having the worst record in baseball last year. So we're going to spend this entire video going through the draft and evaluating the players that we have selected. First thing I wanted to do though is evaluate our roster, and we've had a chance to now see them play over 50 games. We do have some core players to build around: Miguel Sano, Byron Buxton, Jorge Polanco. We'll see what happens with a player like Brian Dozier, who is our most valuable trade asset. When it comes to pitching, that is our biggest need. We have some promise in the minors with players like Jose Barrios. There is also Steven Gonsalves. We just saw Fernando Romero last episode make his first 2 career starts, and he showed a lot of promise. Then down at the AA level, our pitching rotation has been dominant over the first 2 months of the season, and we may spend some more time with the lookouts as the season moves on. I will also be finding some players to call up later in the season as we try to get this team better for year 2. One thing we'll have to look forward to is just getting to see some players make their debuts and hopefully giving us some promise for the future. I believe we have some good players for the future of our starting rotation, but where I'm really concerned is our bullpen. I don't see many players at all that can become above average or high level relievers. We have a couple players that I like, Tyler J being one of them, but I thought it was very important for us to not only address starting pitching in this draft, but also our bullpen. When it comes to position players, I'd like some more depth at catcher. I do want to find the future at first base after Joe Mauer's contract is up. I think our middle infielder situation is pretty good with Dozier, Polanco, and Nick Gordon our top prospect. At third base, Miguel Sano is going to hopefully hold that down as our best bat right now. In the outfield, we could definitely use some help surrounding Byron Buxton and Max Kepler. Buxton is becoming a very good leadoff hitter for us this season, while Kepler is kind of struggling right now at the moment. We can't address every need in the draft, but we'll have a chance to address many of them. Plus, we also have players like Brian Dozier who may be traded at some point. So looking at the scouting now, we've talked about my top prospect being Maxwell Fowler. It was hard to really go in any other direction for the potential number 1 pick. He is only 18 years old, could be ready for the majors very early, may not be an overpowering pitcher, but definitely seems like a solid prospect. So let's get into the 2017 first year player draft. Twins on the clock here with the number 1 overall selection. I hadn't really entertained anybody but Maxwell Fowler as the number 1 pick. There were other good starting pitching options, but Fowler had been my number 1 player since the beginning of the series pretty much. 6'4", 200 pounds from Pennsylvania. There were still other starters like James Willett, who needed more development, wouldn't be ready for a few years. Lewis Whipple, kind of the same situation. I wanted to get obviously good long-term outlook, but I like getting the short-term impact as well, so I could not pass on Maxwell Fowler. He was our number 1 selection in the series. And we also saw a surprise come off the board in the first round, at least to me, Adrian Guardado. I talked about him recently being one of my later round targets, but he went way earlier than I anticipated. So in round number 2, there were still a lot of really good pitching options, and I definitely wanted to address this twice if we could, and this seemed to be where the strength of this draft class was. There were some options. I thought if I addressed starting pitcher here again, it would open up the rest of the draft for us. There were still players though that were intriguing, like Javier Cortez, a right fielder. I was really intrigued by George Chervone and his contact potential being so high. I also like the upside of Jerome Cavanagh from Kansas. Pretty good break, velocity hopefully can get up a little bit. But the player I kept coming back to was Gary Tadano from Japan. 19 years old, he had been one of the players we had scouted the most and would be ready very early in his baseball career to play in the majors. This pick took the most time for me because there were so many pitching options, and then also did I want to maybe address pitcher later if there were so many options now. But I came back to Gary Tadano, and we had to go back-to-back pitcher to begin this draft. So Maxwell Fowler and Gary Tadano, both very young pitchers with high upside that have already developed quite a bit as players. So in round number 3, I knew I could start to switch it up, and George Cervone was still available, and I liked his position flexibility, but his fielding was a concern to me. He's not that fast, not going to have high level power, so I questioned the ceiling there of his skill set. There was David Putnam, who I thought had a little bit more upside and speed at center field. There was also Chuck Bearden, who could also play a little bit of infield and all 3 outfield spots. I liked his speed and our projected upside for fielding and his power. At first base, there was Willie Ordonez, already a 70 overall it says, but we hadn't scouted him very much, and I wanted to try and trust the players that we had scouted a bit more. Gabe Corona was another left fielder that I thought had very good power upside. I liked the speed again, but I kind of wanted some of that position flexibility. Ralph Redmond from California was another intriguing option in the outfield. Again, so many players to choose from, but I came back to Chuck Bearden. I was intrigued with him being a switch hitter, having that power against lefties, and having pretty good upside for a couple years down the road. I also liked that he could play any of the 3 outfield spots. So we go pitcher, pitcher, outfielder. Then in round number 4, this is when I began thinking about when I should address our bullpen and trying to get a high potential reliever. My favorite initially was Dave Barrios from Mexico, 18 years old with good break on his pitches and some upside for strikeouts down the road. There was also Donnie Fernandez, but I didn't think he had as much potential and he was a little bit older. Sandy Bunty was still available, but I didn't have great scouting accuracy on any of these relievers. So I had to also consider other players like Willie Ordonez, who was also still available. A lot of potential there, already a pretty solid prospect with great contact. I ended up going with Dave Barrios with this selection. I wanted to make sure we got a good reliever. I definitely wanted to prioritize pitching in this draft, and I took 3 in our first 4 picks. On to round number 5 now. We have 7 rounds to go through, and I was very happy to see that Willie Ordonez was still available, and I wasn't going to let him go through another round. So this time we do make the selection. High contact first baseman, does have some power as well. Maybe not elite power, but Ordonez seemed to be a very, very good first base prospect, giving us 2 more selections to make. In the 6th round, there were still some good high potential pitchers available like Warren Jackson, who may not be ready for 3 or 4 years down the road, but his outlook was great if he could ever reach that ceiling. Same thing here with Quentin Grant. I was just a little hesitant to take on these major projects that may take 3 or 4 years to develop. Casey Lyons, same situation but as an outfielder. Carlos Rodriguez, 60 overall, 70 potential, with a lot of position flexibility, all outfield spots plus the middle infield spots. I took Carlos Rodriguez here because he has good outlook for the contact rating, plus all that position flexibility. I'm not sure what holes we're going to have in the future, so it's nice to have players that can fill a variety of spots. One more selection now in the 7th round, and a player I had looked at for a long time now in this draft was Sandy Bunty. Still out there, 70 overall, 80 potential, MLB ETA of 2018. I felt like he had good outlook as far as velocity and break goes, and this was a very good 7th round selection. So, that ended the first draft for us, and it was a little interesting going through my first baseball draft, but I felt like we took some very intriguing players, and we'll look at some ratings now. First thing I wanted to do is check out some other selections in this first round. Remember Adrian Guardado? I felt like he was a late round option with high upside. Well, he went in the middle, and right now he's definitely not ready to play, and he's already 22 years old, so I'm surprised he went as early as he did. So we will see how that ultimately plays out. The other pitcher I considered at number 1 was Benny Yamamoto, who ended up with a potential 72 overall. So how did we end up? Led by Maxwell Fowler, here is our draft class. Fowler ended up with 73 overall and a potential. So it looked to be a very good selection for us at number 1 overall. Not dominant in terms of velocity or getting strikeouts, which you would like, but there just wasn't that pitcher at the top of the board, it seemed. He throws a fastball, changeup, slider, sweeping curve, and a sinker. He is a right-handed pitcher, and everybody we took was a right-handed thrower and either a right-handed hitter or switch. That's just kind of how things ended up. Our second round pick was Gary Tadano, 68 overall with B potential, 19 years old. A lot more velocity and strikeout upside, I feel, than Maxwell Fowler, but just not quite as polished of a player. In the third round, Chuck Bearden, 61 overall, again that B potential. And the big strength of his that stands out is that power versus left-handed pitching. He's a switch hitter, and look at those hot zones against lefties. That is really exciting. He also appears to be a pretty good fielder with above average speed. In the fourth round, we selected Dave Barrios from Mexico, 18 years old with good velocity, and he throws a fastball, cutter, slider. 58 overall though, C potential, not a ton of upside there, so we'll have to see if he can develop. At least he is young. In the fifth round though, we got pretty good value, I thought, in Willie Ordonez, who has C potential, but is a 70 overall with great contact against both lefties and righties. And he's no slouch when it comes to power. So I feel like we have ourselves a really intriguing first base option for in 2 years down the road when Joe Mauer's contract comes off the books. In the sixth round, here is utility player Carlos Rodriguez, who enters with good contact, pretty decent hitting ratings across the board, still needs some improvement at fielding, and he'll have the chance to develop for a couple years in our minor league system. Also gives us a little bit of speed, and this team is definitely lacking that right now. We don't have much outside of Byron Buxton. Our final selection was Sandy Bunty, who has 68 overall, B potential, good break, good velocity, and will have to develop for a couple years, but hopefully with that potential ends up being a future member of our Major League bullpen. So what do you think of this first draft class for us? We selected 4 pitchers, and I feel pretty good getting 4 players who have B potential, and then Willie Ordonez has 79, so he's very close to B potential, and is already a pretty solid prospect. We were able to get some really young players who can actually contribute pretty early in their careers. So I think we are very fortunate to get that short-term gain along with great long-term outlook for some of these players. I think this definitely boosts our organization a good bit, and I can't wait to see next year how these players look, because I assume that some may get some chances to play at spring training, and for sure they'll play in the minor league system, and we'll see if we have any more players in the top prospects of Major League Baseball. We are still not done yet, however, addressing this team this season. I assume that at some point we will have some trades to make, trying to acquire more young talent to build around. I will start fielding some trade offers for players such as Brian Dozier. Irvin Santana is on the trading block, but we have gotten no offers. No one's going to offer on $20 million plus for Joe Mauer, so that's not going to happen. We have 2 more years of his big contract. Or 1 more year after this, I mean. When it comes to Dozier, though, it's going to have to be at the right price, because he can still help us out in the long term. He can get a nice contract extension, but if we can get really good value for him, I think we'll have the middle infielders to replace him. And while I don't want to lose his power, I think that we'll still be okay in that department. By the way, I was checking all this player morale stuff, and there were a lot of unhappy and angry players, and just seeing all the reasoning is interesting. The coaching is definitely a concern for a lot of these players, and many of them aren't happy with their current role. But I mean, someone's got to play at AA. You can't all play at the big leagues. But we'll be back with more games soon in the Minnesota Twins franchise. You will see the pace, of course, pick up. That's been a big concern of many. But I wanted us to get to know this team, get to know many of the players. And when there are situations where a player like Fernando Romero is called up, yes, I want to spend some time and watch him have a couple of starts, because he's a player I hope to build around. And that's going to continue to happen as we have players called up or players get opportunities. But I assume the second half of the season will go by pretty quickly. We now have about a month and a half until the All-Star break, and then the trade deadline shouldn't be too far afterwards. I believe that is on July 31st. Outside of Brian Dozier, I'm not sure who all will be shopping at the deadline. I mean, Matt Belisle has our highest overall in the bullpen. Maybe we can trade him. He's a veteran if someone needs some bullpen help. I don't feel like we have a ton to offer when it comes to trades. If Irvin Santana picks up his play, he'll become our next best asset. But there's a reason why we've had no offers so far. His salary is like $15 million a year, and he's had a pretty rough beginning to this season. The first 2 months have not been fantastic. His last start was pretty good, but we'll need these players to step up their game if they're to become more valuable for us when we have the trade deadline in a couple of months. So thank you all for watching. That is it for this episode in the Minnesota Twins franchise. What did you think of the players that we selected? And what do you think about the future of this team? Please leave a like on the video if you enjoyed and leave your feedback down below. Subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all next time. Have a great day.